Hello, welcome to Ukraine This Week. I'm Jonas Czerwiński. This is your one-stop shop to take stock of all the developments on the political and literal battlefield in Ukraine. Let's begin with a review of the most important events of the past week, straight from Ukraine. The past week has seen multiple deadly Russian attacks in Ukraine. Here is a summary showing some of these devastating strikes.
4 people, including 3 children, were killed in Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown Kryvyi Rih on Monday. The attack left some 14 residents wounded and 40 residential buildings in the city damaged. On the same day, in nearby Zaporizhia, a Russian attack killed 1 and injured 21 civilians, including 5 children. In the southern port city of Mykolaiv, 5 people were killed in a drone attack on Monday. 1 woman was hospitalized. The strike damaged a 4-story apartment building and residential homes in the area. 2 were injured in Kharkiv on Wednesday after a Russian drone struck a building near a shopping center. The shrapnel damaged cars and civilian infrastructure, as well as nearby buildings. On that same day, at least 13 other people were injured in attacks that have taken place all over Ukraine. On Thursday, 1 person was killed and 10 injured in a Russian drone attack on the Ukrainian Black Sea port city of Odessa. The strike targeted a residential building and energy installations in and near the city. In total, on that day, 2 people were killed and 28 injured in all Russian attacks across Ukraine.
An apparent Ukrainian special operation has killed a senior Russian commander in a car bomb attack in occupied Crimea. The official was allegedly responsible for ordering missile strikes on civilians.
Ukrainian security services say Captain Valery Trankovsky was killed in the Russian-occupied port city of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. Ukrainian media have cited unnamed sources in the security service of Ukraine, claiming that the attack was a special operation by the agency carried out after a week-long surveillance. Trankovsky was considered a war criminal in Ukraine for allegedly ordering missile strikes from the Black Sea on civilian targets, including the attack on the Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia in July 2022. According to Ukrainian state news agency Ukrinform, 29 civilians were killed in that strike.
2 airports in Moscow were closed on Sunday, the 10th of November, after Ukraine launched the biggest drone attack on this city since the beginning of the war.
On Sunday, Ukraine attacked the Russian capital with at least 34 drones. As a result, the Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo and Zhukovsky airports diverted at least 36 flights, but then resumed operations, according to Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency. At least 5 people were injured in the Moscow area. Russian Defense Ministry says that on the same day, Russian air defenses destroyed another 50 drones over other regions of western Russia. Russian authorities have called the strike an attempted terrorist attack. For its part, that night Russia launched a record 145 drones in Ukraine.
Ukrainian officials say Russia has damaged the dam at the Kurakhove reservoir in eastern Ukraine. The town of Kurakhove is where a major coal-powered thermal power plant is located.
A Ukrainian TV channel has obtained military drone footage showing the moment of the explosion at the dam. The governor of Donetsk region has blamed Russia for the attack, adding that it posed a threat to the people living nearby. The Donetsk region has seen some of the war's fiercest fighting since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022. The Frontline has been moving back and forth in the Donetsk region since 2014, when separatists supported by Russia launched a military campaign against Kyiv.
Donald Trump is appointing his new administration. The president-elect has made ending the war in Ukraine as one of his team's main priorities. In his first speech since winning the US presidential election, Trump said that the war has got to stop.
Donald Trump's new cabinet will be composed of loyal allies close to the president-elect. Marco Rubio is set to become the US Secretary of State. The senator has for years advocated for a tough stance on America's adversaries,
and all the reason more why we must do
such
all
as
we
China, Iran, and Cuba. When it comes to Ukraine, Rubio is in favor of ending the war through negotiations, but against providing Ukraine with the equipment it needs to stave off the Russian forces. The senator has criticized the Biden administration for continuing to fund this, quote, stalemate war.
And as a man who cares deep.
Trump picked Pete Hegzeth as his Secretary of Defense. Hegzeth previously commented on the war in Ukraine, saying it is important, but that it pales in comparison to America's domestic issues. Trump named Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democratic representative and critic of the Biden administration, as his director of national intelligence. In a video message posted on Twitter in 2022, she has called on Zelensky and Putin to agree on Ukraine becoming a neutral colony. Matt Gaetz is put forward as the new Attorney General. Gaetz was among 10 U.S. representatives who has voted against a Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act. Michael Waltz is to assume the role of the National Security Advisor. He is a former soldier with a hawkish stance on foreign policy, especially on China.
I am so honored.
Waltz has previously condemned Russia's invasion. He also supported arming Ukraine to defend against the attack, but he's been critical of Biden's approach to the conflict. Perhaps Trump's most controversial choice is tasking billionaire Elon Musk and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy with leading the newly established Department of Government Efficiency. In the past, Ramaswamy has suggested that Ukraine allow Russia to keep the territory it had already seized in order to end the war. According to his peace plan, Russia would be forced to sever its partnership with Beijing and remove nuclear weapons from Kaliningrad as a repercussion for waging war in Ukraine. Elon Musk has reportedly already joined a phone call between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, just a day after the presidential election in the US. Most of these nominations require Senate approval, but since it's now Donald Trump's Republican Party that controls the Congress, this should go rather smoothly.
Joining us now to explore this topic in greater detail is Bogdan Nahailo, editor-in-chief at the Kyiv Post. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello again. Good to be with you.
So let us begin with Trump's nominations. It almost seems tempting to do a tier list, like everyone seems to be doing tier lists on YouTube nowadays. Beginning perhaps with Tulsi Gabbard, would you say that she would be at the top of the list or rather at the bottom of the list, insofar as her perception in Ukraine is concerned?
I think she'd be at the top of the list in terms of shock and disbelief that somebody as inexperienced and as overtly anti-Ukrainian and pro-Putin has been appointed to such a sensitive, such a responsible job. And in Kyiv Post, we've written about that today already. I mean, it's unbelievable, and we see already reactions within the U.S., within the intelligence community, and particularly even amongst Republicans in the Senate that are supposed to eventually endorse this candidature, who are saying, no way.
So it sounds like an F-tier kind of thing, but do you think that the vote in the Senate may actually prove to be rather difficult for her? It does seem like some of the Republicans, as you're suggesting, might not really be on the same page as her. Well, not to mention the Democrats, obviously.
Let's remember that a few days ago, buoyant, triumphant Trump made it clear that he wanted his colleagues, his supporters in the Senate to bypass a long-standing constitutional provision that appointees by the president in most of the most sensitive jobs are endorsed by the Senate. He wanted the Senate, his majority, to bypass that. There hasn't been a response to that, but he's made that clear. Why did he do that? He knew what was coming up. He knew that some of his appointees would be very controversial, even among Republicans themselves, not to mention the minority Democrats in the Senate.
So why do you think Tulsi Gabbard was chosen for this post? I mean, knowing there would be resistance and knowing that perhaps there might actually be people with more experience in the field of intelligence who might also be on the same page with Donald Trump in the majority of on a majority of issues. Do you think that this choice is designed perhaps as a deliberate signal, as rubbing the salt in the wound, showing the intelligence community, okay, this is what it is. Things are going to change, and you can't really do anything about it. Do you think that this is about basically making a statement?
Look, On the surface, that would make sense because Trump has said that he is going to get even with those in the intelligence, defense departments, law enforcement, legal departments that were seen as his enemies, that he would dispense with them, that he would even call them to account using his clout. And some of his appointees, to the Attorney General and others, suggest that he wants to go that way. So yes, we could take that as an explanation. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but we remember the Trump of old in his first tenure as president, where questions were asked, why is he so friendly with Putin? Why is he so soft on Putin, etc.? And then all sorts of rumors began to emerge about the Russians having dirt on him, not only his financial dealings in Moscow, but the way he behaved or misbehaved in hotel rooms and what the Russians may have to compromise him. Look,
Well, there was no conclusive evidence, right? I mean, the Miller Commission, they didn't say anything specific.
Let's say that was pointed to. And what do we see last week all of a sudden? I'm not suggesting that that is the case. I'm saying that this is a possibility. Last week, we suddenly saw Russian media on prime time showing pictures, nude pictures of his wife, Melania, right? What was that? To say, our candidate has won, we feel great about it? Or was it a reminder to him, let's say a shot across the bows that, hey, remember, we have stuff here that could compromise you seriously. Not that he particularly cares much now, because he got quite a resounding victory and both houses, it seems, are, in his pocket. So he shouldn't care as much as he might have cared a few years ago.
So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned it. The Republican trifecta, if you will. This is going to make the decision-making process more streamlined. But if the decisions are wrong, well, obviously it's easy to see where this might lead. Now, of course, it's not all doom and gloom, apparently. Tulsi Gabbard is one person that has generated quite a few negative comments there. But we also have Marco Rubio. Do you think that this perhaps could be the positive choice that many, including in Ukraine, have been waiting for?
Possibly. Look, he's a loyalist. He's been appointed because he's loyal to Trump. And so he has to serve his master, at least in the interim, at least in the initial period. So I don't think he's going to go against what Trump decides to do, because it's a one-man show, essentially. We don't have the sort of traditional American setup where you have a president, but you have an establishment, you have the elite, you have the civil servants that are the experts in the field, that are the advisors and that are promoting policies. In this case, you have a guy who is me, and if you don't follow my line, you're out of here. Or if they're out of here, they belatedly, as we saw just in the last weeks, call him a fascist and say he's a dictator, that this is not a democratic politician, that he's a neo-fascist, and caveat emptor, buyer beware. That didn't work. These guys know who is appointed, that at least for the initial period, they have to show their loyalty. They have to prove their loyalty. Maybe he won't fire them initially, but he could always, delegate them to secondary roles. Right now, all of them, remember their egos. They're riding high. They've just reached the peak of their careers. It's not just Trump who is there again. But these young people, particularly senators, Congress people, this is the peak of their career. They want to make the most of it. So they're not going to go against their boss at the outset. They may eventually.
So as you're saying, it's a one-man show. The show is The Apprentice, and the line could well be, you're fired, if someone is actually not following Trump's orders. But the crucial question now, is what does it really mean for Ukraine? Because there were, of course, very negative comments initially, understandably so, given that Trump was fairly ambiguous about whether he even wants Ukraine to win the war. He actually never said he wanted Ukraine to win the war. But there are also theories that this could go in the opposite direction, like a dice throw. You could throw a 1, but you could throw a 6. Do you think there is a possibility that Trump, with all these nominees, could actually turn against Putin if Putin starts to misbehave? And if it's going to be Putin who doesn't really want a peace deal, if Ukraine says, okay, we can work something out, and Russia says, no way, we just want to go further and further. So do you think that this could actually work in a very different way than was originally anticipated?
Well, let's go back to what I initially said. If Putin doesn't have the dirt on Trump, then it may go in different ways. But let's remember also that Biden was supportive of Ukraine, but not to the extent that Ukraine would have wanted him to. I don't mean just in recent delays and not allowing Ukraine to get the weapons to hit inside Russia and to eliminate the bases from which the Russians are firing into Ukraine. So Biden turned out to be weaker than expected. Trump, on the other hand, has said, I will end all of this in 24 hours. Okay, he's had 24 hours, maybe not as president.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, the ship has already sailed on that promise, didn't it?
That's controversy. Was there a phone call? Was there not a phone call? The Americans say there was. The press, Peskov, the Russian spokesperson for the Kremlin, says there wasn't. So we don't even know what's going on. I think if there had been something conclusive, or shall we say earth-shattering, a plus for Trump, he would have gone public with it. If they had their discussion and there was no real sort of conclusion to it, then probably he decided to remain quiet. But even so, he keeps saying he will end the war. He will end the war on what terms? If he's seen to be a sellout, to Trump, again, questions will be raised not only about the cost for Ukraine, the cost for Europe, but who is Trump? What do the Russians have on him? Why has he appointed, as we said at the outset, a head of intelligence that is a pro-Russian, a pro-Putin person? Why is he behaving in this strange way for an American president? Why is he basically writing off Europe at the same time? Yes, calling on Europe to pay for more, take more responsibility, but basically, drawing away from Europe in the sense of invoking isolationist principles, etc. We don't know yet. Look, we're in the first days. We're not even in the first weeks, really, of his presidency. I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes, including, phone calls to Zelensky before Trump, and then allowing Musk to take part in that, breaking all sorts of protocol. Clearly, we've got we've got to face up with a different kind of political beast, and we don't know how he's going to behave, what his mind is set on, if he's already formulated a policy or an approach. I think at the moment he's still, treading water, looking to see what signals will be coming from Moscow, from China as well, and others, and playing along, seeing from Europe especially, I would say, and seeing what he can make, how he can make the most of it, and look as credible as a new president, tough, macho president than before. If he decides to sell Ukraine down the drain immediately, he's going to defeat himself by coming across as a kind of, let's withdraw from Afghanistan, and with all the consequences, let's withdraw from Ukraine, and with all the sort of impact that will have on his reputation early on. he may not care. We may see the Donald Trump that says, well, who cares? Ukraine is not central. I've got immigration. I've got domestic issues. I've got to be strong vis-a-vis China and the others. We don't know. It's early days, but as we said at the very beginning, or as I said, the initial signals are not promising.
So do you think that Ukraine is actually trying to play stick and carrot with Trump right now? Because we've had suggestions that Ukraine may offer its own troops to take part in the European security architecture, perhaps taking the burden away from the Americans after the war. Also, a suggestion that access to Ukraine's natural resources could be negotiated. But then there was this absolutely fascinating, if perhaps slightly disturbing article in the Times suggesting that Ukraine could develop its own nuclear weapons. Of course, people are shouting, it's taboo, we shouldn't talk about it. But I mean, why not? Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, and the West has, taken them away in exchange for a promise of ensuring Ukraine's security. That didn't work out. Do you think this signal concerning the possible development of low-yield nuclear weapons is perhaps there to show an alternative? Okay, if you leave us to our own devices, we will not have a choice.
Look, it's clear the Ukrainians will continue fighting, even if the Americans, even if the Europeans desert them. There'll be guerrilla warfare. And, Poland set an example. You fought against the Germans. You had your Warsaw Uprising, despite all odds, and being left alone. Ukraine will do the same. And of course, it will be bloody. It will be extremely costly. But at this stage, Ukrainians, and I think their allies, know what Russian rule, what Russian domination means. The Russians have already destroyed many cities in eastern Ukraine. They've ethnically cleansed these territories. They've plundered the economy that's been there. And there's nothing good that will come out of Russian domination for Ukraine, certainly, but also for its neighbors and for Europe generally. The signals it will send, the anxiety it will cause, etc. But the Ukrainians, I think, after all, the Ukrainian leadership is in a desperate situation. Let's be frank. This turn of events in Washington, the problems within Europe, in the capitals, look at the political internal situation in Germany, look at the problems that Macron faces, look at Britain's internal problems, etc. Look at the far right coming more and more into the picture in Europe. It's not an encouraging situation. Ukrainians, I think, by and large, those that follow events are appreciative of this, and they know that they cannot expect the outside world to fully back them, at any price. But they still they believe that the Americans and their European partners will at least give them the means to take the fight responsibly into Russia and to set the Russians back, to get them to pull back and to disturb their ability to fire into Ukraine, to fire their nightly, daily rockets and Shaheds, etc. I mean, the Ukrainians are not saying, dear Poles, dear Brits, put your boots on the ground. They're not saying that to the Americans. They're saying, give us the weapons, for God's sake. We can do this. We can do this, but don't make us fight with one arm tied behind our back. And this was the problem with Biden's administration, that Biden, very much like Trump, his initial statements have boiled down to, we want to contain the Russians. We don't want to aggravate the situation, but we are not saying openly we want Russia to be defeated, right? This is the game changer. Do we want Russia to be defeated, or do we want a ceasefire that is going to freeze the line of contact for 2 or 3 years, allow the Russians to rebuild their strength, and then to invade again into Ukraine, but maybe into the Waltz, maybe to, interfere in Poland's and Czech, British, French politics through, fake news and cyber warfare and whatever it is. third parties that are ultra-right that support Moscow, etc. It's a delicate moment. I think the Ukrainians feel that, but it's not just desperation. They just feel that we're at a turning point. It's now or never. Either we're going to be sold down the drain, or at least Europe will rally together and will say, okay, we can't rely so much temporarily on the United States, depending on how things go there. And so we have to take the bull by the horns and, wake up to realities to the extent that we've not all wanted to do for the last 30 years.
So do you think to some extent this also applies to Russia, namely that they're also getting a bit desperate? They are sending tanks from Mosfilm, essentially film props, T-55s. I mean, they are from 1950s, 1960s vintage. So it's clear Russia is not doing that great either. Do you think that this may actually be something that Trump will notice and say, okay, perhaps I might actually have an opportunity to weaken these guys because they are not really doing that well at this moment? Do you think that Trump would be a man to pass on such an opportunity specifically? Of course, excluding all the possibilities that there might be something behind the scenes which could influence his decision-making processes.
What you say makes perfect sense, if we assume that he has normal advisors. But as we said at the outset, has he appointed normal advisors? Has he appointed professionals, experienced people in this field? Or has he appointed loyalists who have beaten the drum in the tune that Trump wanted to hear? And this is the disturbing factor, that we are missing this logical, experienced, shall we say, know-how affecting his choice of policies. And unfortunately, what we have is a continuation of this public appeal, this populism, this let's make America great, and whatever sounds great, let's do it, without thinking through the consequences.
What do you think about Mike Waltz? Because he's going to be instrumental there as National Security Advisor. Could he be perhaps a better man for the job than Jake Sullivan?
Look, the rumors are that had Harris won, that Jake Sullivan would have been the what do we call him, Minister of Thing, the Secretary of State, yeah? Probably better, but to what extent is he going to have free rein to do his things? And to what extent will he be stymied by the head of intelligence? To what extent will they block one another within the internal cabinet? Yes, there are 2 or 3 appointees that are very pro-Ukrainian. Look, the key one, I think, at the moment, Trump has hinted at the fact that he wants to appoint a special appointee, a special representative to deal with Ukraine and with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? We used to have Kurt Volker doing that in the first Trump presidency. He did a very good job, and he's still out there. But we may have somebody like Mike Pompeo, right, who wasn't given a job right now in this thing. If we get a really serious candidate who knows Ukraine, who knows the realities, that could be the saving grace, shall we say, at this point. But we just don't know. We're awaiting. Will Trump actually appoint such a person? And if so, who? That, as I say, could answer some questions and resolve some matters.
So what about the European leaders? Would you think that their reaction is anything to go by in terms of how well they are prepared? I mean, many of them were hoping that Trump would not become president. But now that, this has happened, what do you make of the way that they're approaching this? Do you think that Europe will be able to rally behind Ukraine? Will it be able to overcome its own shortcomings? Or will it descend into a further political crisis?
Look, there are 2 factors here. Europe has to live with the US, whether it likes it or not. It has to kind of come to terms with the new leadership, with the new realities. And so we are seeing Macron, we're seeing Scholz, we're seeing the British Prime Minister, congratulating Trump on his victory and saying, look, we've got to live together and let's make the most of it and let's move on. Okay, that's good. That's politics. That's diplomacy in action, and we don't expect anything else. And we've got to keep NATO alive, for example, to mention, not even going into economic and trade aspects and etc. But I think that you're seeing some European leaders. On the one hand, trying to play up the Ukrainian card to say, I'm still with Ukraine and I'm still backing Ukraine. Let's take Scholz's discussion with Putin just now. But on the other hand, is he really interested in? He's interested in survival. He's got domestic issues. He's got an election coming up. He's got the far right on the ascendant, the far left attacking him. He wants to look good on the exterior, and he wants to look good internally. So a phone call and a discussion with Putin, even if his press secretaries say that he made all the relevant points about firmness as regards supporting Ukraine, but we really don't know what was said and how that will play out. But that was needed. Macron's been more consistent, shall we say, and I think the Brits have been more consistent. Poland has been very consistent. I think whether it's the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister or the President, they've all been consistent in their support for Ukraine at this very difficult moment. I thought about this discussion today, and I again compared, we're almost at 1,000 days of the war. On the 19th of November, we will have 1,000 days of the war. And I remember, Churchill talking about our darkest hours in the first stage of the war. And I would say that for Ukraine, even we thought that the darkest hours were in the first 6 months or so, the first 9 months, when the support wasn't as there in the quantities that it has been in the last year or so from the West, from Ukraine's allies and supporters. But I think today, with what's happened in Washington, with the daily very strong attacks by missiles and drones on Ukraine to flatten not only its cities, but to flatten its energy infrastructure and make the winter period extremely difficult, and for the advances being made small but steady in the Donbass by Russian troops. All of this makes this the darkest hours. And just to go back to something that you said before, in terms of where we're at, I think that right now is a particularly difficult situation for Ukraine, for its president to maintain his credibility and leadership at a time of weariness, at a time of problems, not so much with corruption these days. Look at America today. What kind of structure do we have? An oligarchy, a plutocracy coming to the fore. Not exactly time to preach to the Ukrainians about getting their act in order. But in terms of where their act potentially abandoned or potentially limited in the supply of what they're getting, it's a very worrying situation. And I think that this winter will be very difficult. And depending on what signals we get from Washington, but more particularly, will Europe be united and galvanized by what it's seen to have happened in the US? That will be the game changer. And from that, the Ukrainians will have to draw lessons, inspiration, or, be forced to think about unpleasant realities, the need to come to terms on terms that they've not wanted to up till now.
These are difficult moments for Ukraine, and of course also a moment of soul-searching for European politicians. And also the American ones, really, because it does seem like the question of principles, which has been one of the main advantages of the Western political model, right now perhaps might be taking a back seat, which would not be a good thing, as you've indicated, because this would actually be an open invitation to tyrants and autocrats across the world to try and undermine the international order. But, I mean, there is still scope, perhaps, for good decisions to be made. Let's hope that they are. There we go. Bogdan Achało was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now I invite you for an interview with Oleksiy Goncharenko, Ukrainian MP from European Solidarity. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So in looking at Trump's nominations and initial decisions, do you think that Ukraine is in greater trouble than it was? Or perhaps there could be a ray of hope emerging out of this?
I don't think that these nominations play a big role for Ukraine. It's an internal American thing. And let us be frank, the main person is Donald Trump. And all these people who are selected by him, I think one of the most important reasons why they were selected, because they're loyal to him. So the question is about Donald Trump. By the way, Senator Rubio, whom you show now, who will be probably State Secretary of the State, I know him personally, and I can tell you that he's a very strong politician. And I think it's a very good choice of President Trump. There are other people about whom I have more concern. But again, the main decisions will be made by one person, by Donald Trump himself. So I don't think that much has changed. We can say that Donald Trump, we have concerns about what he will do, but also we have hopes. And I hope that our hopes will be fulfilled.
So what do you think is going to happen in between the end of the Biden presidency and the beginning of Trump's presidency? This is a very difficult moment, isn't it? Because Joe Biden doesn't have, the legitimacy to make choices that would bind the US for a long time. He can still deliver weapons. He can actually deliver on his promise to send these weapons because not all of them have reached the front line, as President Zelensky said recently. Do you think that Russia may be trying to basically use this window of opportunity? Is this a window of opportunity for the Russian army right now?
Russian army tries to use American elections for quite already a time, and they will continue to do this. They try to capture as much territory as possible for the moment. Speaking about what will happen now, from one point of view, President Biden, who is still president, I hope he will deliver all which is he authorized by Congress. It's near $7 billion weaponry, which is a serious thing, to Ukraine. And I hope this will happen. And Secretary Blinken already said this. From another point of view, President Trump, we know that he maybe will appoint already envoy, special envoy, on dealing with the Russian-Ukrainian war. And this envoy, if he will be appointed by Donald Trump, he can start to work now. So he can go to Moscow, he can go to Kiev, he can speak with both sides. I think that's how President Trump sees the next steps in order to have a clear picture for the moment of his inauguration in the end of January, to know exactly what he will do.
And do you think that Donald Trump may actually perhaps benefit from knowing more about the conflict, perhaps visiting Ukraine? This has been a transformative experience for many European leaders, for example. When they saw the atrocities in Bucha, they realized the stakes are perhaps higher than they ever were.
Yeah, but I think here it's quite a different situation. I don't believe that Donald Trump will go to Ukraine just to see and to understand. I think he will come to Ukraine only to put some dot, to show his victory, to show his success. He wants Ukraine to be his victory, his success. The problem for us is that maybe what is Ukrainian definition of victory is not Donald Trump's definition of victory. So that's our concern, but we can't say anything more exact about this. So I don't think that Donald Trump will come here just with a visit. It's not the case. It's from my point of view.
And do you think that Donald Trump realizes that he's not facing, a difficult counterparty in a business transaction, right? He's not facing a tycoon who doesn't, want to conduct a transaction the way he wants. Basically, talking with Putin, he's talking to a war criminal. He is talking to a dictator who has violent designs for Ukraine and other countries. Do you think that at some point, perhaps, Trump's desire for victory may transform into a much more realistic look at Putin, at how to deal with Putin? Because now, it does seem a bit idealistic that, you can just make a phone call and make everything go away. Do you think that this realization will come sooner or later?
I agree with you 100% that reality of trying to... So Donald Trump will try to make a deal with Putin. But the question is that Putin is really a dictator, quite crazy person, and quite emboldened during last time with the last event. So I think it is very possible that from these conversations between Trump and Putin, nothing good will happen. For Putin. And if Trump will feel that Putin is just playing with him games, I think Donald Trump can completely change his attitude and he can be very tough on Russia. I think that he really is the kind of person who can order a bombing of Moscow. I'm not saying that he will do this, but I'm saying that he is ready mentally, he's ready for this. So it can go very different ways.
And what about the proposals made by President Zelensky? He did speak to Trump. Apparently, they did find some common ground. There is also a new plan for increasing Ukraine's resilience. This is all supposed to be connected to the earlier victory plan. Do you think that Ukraine perhaps may offer a package that will appeal to Trump's business sense and make him think, okay, this is not just about, protecting a country that is, far away from the US. It's actually a good deal, a deal that I want to go ahead with.
Absolutely. That's what we should do. That's what we need to try to do. And I hope we will do this. Exactly. Speaking about all these plans, it's too many plans already, different plans announced. Ukraine should do our best inside the country to be as strong as possible, and to show to Donald Trump that supporting Ukraine is really a great deal and a good investment for the United States of America, which is. It's the fact, it's reality, but we need to show it and to convince him.
So overall, we're entering a difficult and unpredictable period in diplomacy, but there is still hope that decisions positive for Ukraine could be reached, and that this conflict may be resolved not just in a way that's convenient for the US, but also that has the element of justice, which is very important, not just for today, but also for future generations. Alexei Goncharenko was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much
for sharing your insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us at the same time next week, and in the meantime, please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rawiński. Bye for now.